Good afternoon and welcome to the 2021 Owner Symposium. My name is Nick Najjar, and I'm an HCV participant and owner relations specialist for the Chicago Housing Authority. I'll be your moderator for this Find and Retain the Right Fit Renter session today. I'm also joined by staff from the symposium planning team who will help run the webinar. Before I introduce the other panelists, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the webinar features. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in the chat box once you locate it, and we will answer them at the end of the session during the Q&A portion. If you have a CHA personal account related question, we're not able to access your account and address those situations for you during this webinar. Instead, we recommend you send an email to owner.info@thecha.org, or you can call us at 312-935-2600 for any assistance. All right, let's get started again. My name is Nick Najjar, and this is the Find and Retain the Right Fit Renter session. With us today, if you could please introduce yourself, Mary Jones from Agora.
Good morning, everyone. Again, thank you so much. I'm honored to be part of this panelist. My name is Mary Jones again, and I'm with Agora Community Services. We're located on the south side of Chicago, 1831 East 79th Street, and we focus on HUD services for everyone that needs housing, whoever that is, and I believe it's everyone. So I thank you for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to helping you to answer all your questions.
Thank you, Mary. And Perry Kareem.
Hi, I'm Perry Karim. I'm from the Center for Conflict Resolution. We're Chicago's very own community mediation center. We've been around since 1979, and we have been mediating community disputes between individuals since that time, and we've been mediating evictions and landlord-tenant issues through the Circuit Court of Cook County since 1989. So I'm very excited to be here to talk about conflict and communication and mediation.
Thanks, Perry. And Anna Kelly.
Hi, my name's Anna Kelly. I'm a landlord and a property owner for single-family homes. We place families in single-family homes in mobility areas. So we've been doing this probably the past 5 years. We're growing, so we love what we do.
Thank you. So next, we're just going to dive right in. So in regards to setting expectations, what would each of you say is important to be upfront about communication styles and preferences?
I'm happy to jump right in. I have to say that when we see conflict between landlords and tenants, it's when it's already gotten to the worst part of it. It's escalated to the point where a third party has to be brought in. And a lot of times the relationship has faltered because people have not had the same expectations around communication. Sometimes that might mean that people don't know how to contact their landlord, or what's the appropriate method of communication, or the other way around, that the landlord is communicating in ways that the tenant isn't either receiving or isn't receiving well. And so, you know, I always think about how we get calls oftentimes from tenants who are, you know, my landlord is harassing me, my landlord is being passive aggressive, my landlord is not, you know, treating me with respect. And most of the time, what it is that they're just communicating in a way that isn't being received in the same way that it's sent. And so setting those expectations up front can really help people both remove the barriers as to even just how to get a conversation started about the important things that landlords and tenants need to communicate about. It can also take away some of the anxiety that can come from it of, you know, am I supposed to reach out? Is it okay to reach out? You know, and I think that it can also help with boundary setting. Because the last thing that you want is a tenant who is calling you on numbers that you don't want to be reached at times you don't want to be reached at, or vice versa, that, you know, we're using the appropriate method of communication that is respectful and is going to be received in the best light possible on both sides.
Excellent. I wanted to add, I mean, because this is something that has never been taught. I mean, we used to have economics in school. Well, that's gone, right? So, what is actually being taught that's part of practical education that we need to, with our three basic needs, which is housing, food, and clothing, in that order. So, I believe because of that, it is important that as a HUD certified housing counseling agency, we kind of go to the bare roots, because it is very important that there is a line of communication and expel the fear, because most people are just fearful when they're behind. The last thing they think about doing is call the person that they owe. That's the last thing that they'll do. So we have to break that, because if you call the landlord that 15 days when you find out you're going to be laid off, if you call them then they can come up with something, or you can communicate. They will love the fact that a tenant is communicating. But if they're not hearing it from here and here, which means the landlord can communicate that to them as well, because chances are they've never even heard it. A lot of tenants haven't heard it. So one thing that happens in a village is that everyone's saying the same good things. And that's what we have to get back to. Everyone must say the same good things. And if you hear it over there and hear it over there, ultimately you'll start doing it. So I believe communication is the key. There is nothing else other than that, because you can work out something if you at least open up the lines of communication and expel the fear. I didn't want to take up all the time because I could keep going.
Hi, how are you? I thought I'd like chime in as a property owner and also as a landlord as well. So, I see, the side that like is the level prior to when it gets to you guys. So, it's so important at the least time to really explain yourself and explain your expectations. What is in the let's read it together. Let's go over all the finer points. Let's understand what my expectations of you are, and then what your expectations of me is. Because I mean, I place families in mobility areas that are ready to take that step up, you know. And my husband and I, we work very hard to ensure that communication is not skewed, is not understood. I repeat things, I text things, I send things in writing. I just make sure that everything is super, super, super clear, because at the end of the day, it just creates frustration for the tenant, and it'll create frustration for myself. And, and sometimes our tenants work with two landlords. They work with myself and then my husband. So I have to make sure that my husband and I, we're on the same page. It's like, don't put out expectations that we're going to do something. We have to be on board at the same time. We cannot misinform our tenants, because I deeply respect, what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go, especially, families who are a part of the mobility program. And I'm very mission oriented when it comes to placing families in a mobility home, in a mobility neighborhood. I try to get neighbors involved to ensure that, we're really all on the same page here. I feel like if you have to go beyond our resources, there's something kind of wrong between him or her or you and I. So we really, really work hard on our end as landlords to be super clear on, how important tenant landlord relations are.
Definitely, that is very important as well. So, uh, continuing on to another question, what are important steps you think property owners can take to build trust with their tenants, to have those situations where they are comfortable coming to you as a property owner?
I believe, let me jump in, because you know what? I like preparation. And I believe landlords want to do all they can to prepare for having tenants. Whether you're just starting or you've been in it for a long time, preparation is an ongoing thing, because based on what's going on in the community and in the world, there'll be different factors that may have to be adjusted. So what do you have to do? I love when Michael Jordan, he said when the opposing team was tapping into their plays, he said, well, no problem. All we have to do is adjust. So landlords have to sometimes adjust and be prepared. So some of the things I believe, and I just want to mention a couple in preparation, is what are we looking at as landlords when we first approach or start looking at tenants or reviewing tenants? Are we just looking at that credit score and their bank account or what they say they have? Or is that all we're doing? I believe that if I am looking to have a long-term relationship, and a year is pretty long, I would really want to make sure that you're making the right decision as a tenant as well as protecting myself. So I've been pushing for just having that aspect understood, that if they say to the tenant when they first start, if you fall behind, I need you to know that we have resources that can help you. Now that will build trust, because that's telling the tenant that that landlord is going a little further and saying, if that were to happen, let me know, because I have resources that I can give you now and after if you're approved as a tenant. Also, I believe that even before approving a lease, that it is good for a landlord to also have as much information as possible. And one thing you want to know about a tenant is how they're going to handle a crisis period in their lives, because that's going to affect you as a landlord. And if you know that they have taken some steps in order to do that, then they're going to be prepared and you're going to know they're prepared. So when a crisis hit, they'll be able to kick into crisis mode. So I believe that we look at as a society only the credit scores and how much money, whether they can afford it. I believe we need to add in there as a landlord, are they willing to have housing advising or housing counseling prior to taking any unit? There's at least 75% of tenants and homeowners that sign on to permanent documents for at least a year or 30 years, and they are actually, the housing cost is over their heads, or they don't have a backup plan in case they have a problem. So if that's the case, that's brewing problems down the road. So if they have housing advising prior to getting the lease, then you'll know that they know what to do when a crisis hits. So that's my preparation.
And I can absolutely, agree with you on that as well. There's crisis things that happens all the time in homes, and actually, I've been so pleasantly surprised with tenants. They'll call me on the phones like, Anna, we have a backup going on. My fear is that I want to quell any sort of fears, like, we're going to be out there, we're going to take care of this. But they're sort of shockingly, it's like tenants are really good. They're like, hey, we know this stuff happens, as long as we just hear from you and I hear from them, I always do a follow-up. I'm pretty good about stuff like that. And, I've trained my husband to be as good too, because at the end of the day, really, I don't want the phone call from CHA saying, hey, something's not being taken care of. But sometimes it'll take me like a week or longer to get a contractor to figure something out. But as long as I keep my tenant informed that they are important, this is important, we're trying to find the right contractor to do this work, they will understand. And really, I've had very low instance where a tenant felt like, I wasn't handling a situation, because these things happen all the time, especially, in single family homes. You have things that happen all the time. And sort of, I think that's where our tenants, stick with us for as long as they do, because, we are responsive. And really that's, chiming in on the communication, being responsive to tenants, I consider as a real pride, as a real pride thing for us, to take care of them. And then again, that builds the trust, and then we move on. And then when I ask for rent increases, it's justified. We're taking care of the property, all of that. So nobody feels like, hey, somebody shorted me. Nobody's talking to me or any of that, at the end of the day. So yeah, it's a constant work in progress for sure,
And, I want to add to that, the whole piece about being responsive. We always talk about at CCR that, conflict is not about the facts, it's about perception and how the facts have impacted us. And I think about that piece about being responsive, it's like you may have dealt with the same issue as a landlord 1,000 times, and you know that it takes a week to get this done, or you know that this person is going to have to come back 3 times to do it, but the tenant may not have ever had that experience. And so for them, it feels like it's taking an eternity, and nobody is giving them expectations about when their home, where they're living, is going to be back to normal. And so it starts to create anxiety. It starts to create escalation. And so people are going to start to say, if you're not going to fix this for me, and I'm not hearing from you, and I don't know how long this is going to take, it starts to feel like it's never going to be resolved. And I have to find someone who will listen to me, who will hear me, and who will fix it for me. And so that's when escalation starts to happen. And so being responsive, making sure that you're clearly setting those expectations. And then I think most importantly, you can say almost anything to another person as long as you're thinking about how you're saying it, right? So even if you have to be giving bad news, or if somebody is telling you that they can't make rent or damage the property in some kind of way, how you react to that, even the smaller, less egregious things, is really going to impact how they're going to approach you in the future. And so it's like, if I tell you that, something on the door is scratched or broken, and you act like it's the end of the world, I'm not going to tell you when there's a roof leak. I'm not going to tell you when these things are getting worse, because I know that you're going to blame me, judge my family, judge me. And it starts to create this thing where there's not emotional safety and there's not trust. And so, building that trust by responding without judgment, by listening, by acknowledging where people's experience might be different from your own, being open-minded to what people are telling you, even if you don't think that it's exactly, what happened in those situations. Those things build trust, and over time, you're going to get a lot out of that investment.
Absolutely. And even in like I said, even at lead time, I tell my tenants, look, I'm very clear. I do quarterly inspections. My expectation is that I get access to that unit so that I can see what is going on. Because sometimes tenants aren't telling me, like, oh yeah, the cabinet's been broken for 2 months. It's been sitting on the side of the wall there. But it's like, you can tell me these things and I can see them through the quarterly inspections, or, whatever the case may be, obviously with from the tenant. But, I emphasize all the time, it's better to let me know, if something needs to be fixed, because then I can have the guy out there so he can do like 2 or 3 other things, so I'm just not paying him to come out there once. He can just take care of everything. So, helpful. And if your tenant knows that that's happening and this is coming up, like, one of my tenants says, oh, I know, Anna, it's to be expected. I wouldn't expect anything less. I know you're out here like taking care of stuff, and, and that's really cool by me. So I'm like, great. So they already have that mindset. The seed has been planted, so to speak, in them. And then from there, it just really grows. So, it's really about the landlord, the properties, setting that agenda, setting that tone, sort of. And that's really what we try to do on our, that tone. And just, go on from there. And again, along with that trust, so they know that we're out there. We know we're doing a thing. They must allow us to do a thing, and then we take care of situations where they get, bad, or so to speak. Yeah.
And it is a relationship. I mean, it might be a year relationship, but it's a relationship and it takes work. So, and it takes work on both sides. And I believe there's a severe lack of accountability sometimes on both sides. So we have to hold each other accountable to build that relationship, because a tenant wants to live free and comfortable, and the landlord wants to live free and comfortable for that year. And it takes work on both sides. So as much as can be done, that's what we're looking to do. So the thing that would accompany them coming in as a foresight with the lease, with the agreement to have that housing counseling so that they are prepared, so they know they're not getting into a lease or a homeownership issue before they're greater than their particular income would support. Um, if they fall 30 days behind, that 31 days, they should get a notice from the landlord that supports that, them being able to retain the housing, give them an opportunity. Because just like homeowners, renters also receive free housing counseling from HUD, and it's out there, and most renters aren't even aware of it. So that's my main reason for being on here, because most renters aren't even aware that there is free services for them as well. Homeowners get a 31 days behind, they get a notice to call. Renters don't get it. So now those that are good tenants, you're losing them because they just don't know. And once they find out, then they're able to do that. So they're, having them agree to having housing counseling if they're 31 days behind will allow that issue to not go past that 3, 6, 4, 5, 6 month period, because they're dealing with it on that 31st day. And they have agreed to do that upon leasing.
I want to say one more thing here about the trust, is that a lot of times when we go into that relationship, and I totally agree, it's a relationship, and ideally it's more than a year-long relationship. I mean, if this goes well, this could be a decade-long relationship. And the thing is that when we start that relationship, we think we're starting at zero with someone new in our lives, and you're not. You're not starting at zero. You're starting at oftentimes a disadvantage. Because of previous relationships with landlords or previous relationships with tenants, the ways things have gone well and haven't gone well in the past, we all bring those lenses into these new relationships. And so really working to establish norms and boundaries and trust can really help you sort of make up for the lost ground from previous experiences that we've had. Because I think a lot of times for tenants, it's like, well, this is a landlord. Landlords act like this. This is what my previous landlord was doing. And if you're not responding to me, it's because you're avoiding me. And if you're coming to check on me, it's because you want to judge the way I live. And so then you start to make assumptions about where people are coming from. And so really investing at that beginning, I think is just so important, because we're not starting from scratch.
Right. But what my husband and I have done, and I think is really, really thoroughly, we thoroughly try to vet tenants, because some tenants, are fine with staying in an apartment. But if you're ready to take on a single family home, which is all what we deal with, it's a different set of responsibilities. And I have to really, really speak to families saying, ready for single family home, because it's a different responsibility than being like in a 6 flat or a 4 flat or apartment building. It's a lot more responsibility, and some families are like, I'm just not ready, and that's okay. But we know this beforehand, before we get into this sort of like cycle of missed expectations, and people don't quite get like getting in single family homes a little bit than living in an apartment. So, we really, really try to educate. I really try to educate our tenants on like, hey, your trash cans need to look like this all the time, or else rats are going to come. You've got to do this. You've got to stay on them. I tell my tenants, I drive by all of my properties at least once a week, as I'm going out to work. And if I send you a picture, it's because, I want to see some improvement, because that causes problems for the neighbors. And then the neighbors, don't want to think anything less of you. So they want you to be reactive as well. So, and like I said, we're dealing in mobility areas where families have had counseling, to be in types of neighborhoods. And so, we want to be very respectful and attentive to homeowners that are around, the tenant. And I say to the tenant, in a good way, I said, I want you to be the best house on the block. Okay. There should be no difference between the home that you live in and then the homes next door around you that are all homeowners. So that's the important message that I really try to send, to our families. And they're very receptive, and they said, we are ready for this change. We're ready to move forward. Which is great to hear, because really that's the whole mission of the program, is to get families to better neighborhoods, better stock of housing, all of that. So it really is just such a beautiful win-win situation for everybody.
What last thing I want to say on this, and I wanted to get it out before I forgot it again, is that even if you own a single family home and you're renting out a portion of your home, if you have a 2 unit and you live in it, you are a landlord and you're going to be responsible as a landlord. You would be surprised the number of people that don't understand that once you rent or board, you still, there's some laws that you have to follow and know, and you just want to connect with that and make sure that you have all things in order, even if you're just renting to a relative, because that can be problems too. So if they're renting, they're a renter and they're a relative.
Absolutely.
So we can continue on to the next question. When things go wrong, basically, what common communication issues have you seen arise between property owners and tenants? And what can also be best practices for owners to handling those conflicting situations?
Well, as a property owner and landlord as well, I really, our management tool is really going back to the lease. You know, you've signed two documents, right? You've signed our lease and you've signed the HAP contract. So you have already agreed to abide by these rules. Okay. So I have tools in my box and the tenant has tools in his or her box. So I always go back to the lease because really that is the only thing that binds us together. So I'm very clear with our tenants when things start to go sideways. Look, according to the lease, and you agree to it, you have to allow me to access the unit, or you have to abide by the things that I agree to. You can't just attach a door where there isn't a door. And if I say no, you have to agree to it and you have to agree to the reasons why. I own the property and you agree to abide by these rules. So, I'm constantly educating our tenant, just even on the lease, and I'd like to say, I would say, 90% of the time, it's good. We're very clear from day one, again, setting that tone. But then I set the tone too when it comes to a dispute or something that, a miscommunication or a missed expectation. I think a lot of confusion comes when it's like a missed expectation. Well, I thought that, that you guys were going to fix it in a week. It's like, no, remember, I sent you a text and then I sent you an email saying that we would fix it in 2 weeks because the contractor has to wait for materials to come. It can't happen instantly. It's a major repair. And then you explain all of that. And then even up to the point where I'm including the counselor, because sometimes, like I said, you have to involve the counselor and the counselor can further reinforce that communication. Because there's some repairs that just take a little longer than others. But I would say, like I said, 90% of our tenants understand where we're coming from. They see our responsiveness. But, I do have means where I've had to, lay down the law saying, like, look, if you don't want to stay, that is completely within your right. If you're not happy, sometimes things aren't a right fit, and that's okay. And I emphasize that to even our tenants that are, in a dispute or something with us, it just wasn't a right fit. We can't have contractors there within like an hour. It's just impossible for us to do. Maybe, like I said, maybe in when you were living in the apartment in a big structured apartment, there was a guy there 24/7 who can do, work orders. Well, that's just not the way with us. We have to have contractors, we have to set up times and all of that, and you have to be available, you have to agree to access the unit, all of that. So when you get into sort of those kinds of things, that's when it just becomes like, as I call it, like super sticky, where the tenant's not agreeing because they don't understand the time frames, all of that. So I just go right back to the lease and just say, look, according to the lease, we can do X, Y, and Z. And that's super important. You have to understand that. Going back to that lease is number one.
And I wanted to add to that And that goes right back to accountability along with expectations. I expect someone to be accountable. So with that lease, I'm going to say this because I've been in housing counseling since 2009 and I have not seen anything different. 89% of people do not even read the lease. They just want the keys. And one thing that we do as HUD Certified Housing Counseling Agency is that we give them an understanding of how important it is for them to read that lease, highlight that lease, and make sure that everyone in that household understands that lease, because everyone in that household is going to be held responsible for what's going on in that lease. So that goes right back to being for preparation and the ability to hold them accountable as you research, I mean, as you go back and refer back to that lease, because they have done that. So we really stress the necessity for you to read that lease. You read that lease and you highlight it. And we actually require they do it and send us the highlighted copy back. And we do that with mortgages as well. We give people 30 days. 30 days, you should be able to read 2 or 3 pages of your whole mortgage package. Within 30 days, you should have it done and highlight anything that is a question mark. And then we ask them to send us the highlighted pages. So it's teaching accountability because, again, it's not being taught. And as a village, we're a village here. Everyone on this call, we are a village. We have to share what we understand and what we know, because there is someone out there that don't. And we can't hold them accountable. We can hold them accountable, but they simply don't know. And we're just trying to help.
A couple things that I want to add to the conversation about, common communication issues, vague language. I remember a case that we were mediating where the issue was it was damage to the roof of the home, and the landlord lived out of state and was providing a fix for this issue. A tree had fallen on the house, and so the tenants are like, we've got this tree, it fell through the roof and you have to fix it. And the landlord's like, of course, I'm on it, sends the contractors, they do the work, the landlord pays the rent. And then the tenants are still mad about it. And they won't stop bothering this landlord about the roof. And so they end up in court. The landlord on their way to court is like taking pictures of the house to prove that they had fixed it. And the tenants get there and they're like, you didn't fix the roof. And the landlord's like, you're liars. Here's my pictures. And what had happened was that the tree fell through the roof and through the interior ceiling into the nursery of their child. And there were tree branches hanging over the crib. And they had both been saying the roof, the roof, the roof. And they were talking about 2 different things, right? And so they're using vague language and they're like, we've been talking about it. We can't solve it. And it's like, they weren't talking about the same thing. They didn't take the moment to explore, like, what are you experiencing? What are you seeing? What's happening for you? And why is that different from what's happening to me? I think that we also see a lot of avoidance and people who didn't want to have hard conversations along the way. And then they're suing for a security deposit or they're suing to evict. And so there are all these missed opportunities for communication where people either communicated and didn't understand or they just didn't communicate. So we see a lot of pictures of stains on carpets and holes in floors and things like that, where people have, again, thought that they were communicating clearly and sort of not checking in to see, like, what is the other person hearing from me? What is the other person understanding? And unfortunately, we actually see a lot of conflict and miscommunication around expectations and flexibility. So we've seen cases that end up, unfortunately, in evictions court where a landlord has been traditionally very flexible about when rent can be paid or something like that. And then when the landlord tries to enforce the lease agreement and tries to start to set the boundaries later and start to hold the tenant accountable to pay the rent on the date agreed upon, the tenant now, I think reasonably, doesn't always understand why it was okay before and it's not okay now. And so where the landlords seem to be accommodating for a really long time, now holding the tenant to the bare standard of the lease is now looked at as an aggression because of that previous flexibility. And so I always recommend if you're making any modifications to those expectations, that it should be agreed on and written. That if I've seen situations where, say, like the tenant doesn't get paid till the first, and the bank transfer that the landlord prefers for paying the rent doesn't go through for 3 business days, that they agree differently than, the rent is paid versus when the rent is received, right? Maybe that's more specifically laid out than it would be in just a standard lease agreement. So even if you're being flexible and attentive because you want to keep that good tenant, make sure that anything that you're doing is just clearly outlined, and that if you are being flexible or making an exception, that it's clearly an exception and the conditions of that exception are being laid out clearly. And I always recommend, that in those situations, more communication is better than less. Start with curiosity, try to hear them out. Where are they coming from? What are you understanding, about this? Do you have any questions for me? And being really proactive of, let me check in on you, or check in with you, not check in on you, right? Check in on you makes it sound like, let me see what you're doing and make a judgment about it. But check in with you, like, are we on the same page still? And is this still, working for both of us? Let's talk about it.
And if you don't have property manager like Anna that really is going to make sure that you're staying on top of things, I would strongly suggest that you take that 6-week class, property landlord education class. You want to know what you're responsible for. So take that landlord education class. Yes, it's 6 weeks, but it's going to be worth it. And it's different from the landlord counseling. It's totally different from landlord counseling because it approaches it from a different aspect. The landlord education is saying what your responsibilities are and what you can and cannot say, and what you should and should not say, and your response, especially when we have a crisis going on. So you want to know right now what's going on. So if you have a property management company that you're working with, you want to get to that management company and ask them, based on COVID-19, and am I okay? What do I need to do? I'm getting ready to lease. What do I need to say? What can I not say? What can I not do? Because you want to be prepared. If you go through the class, then that will definitely help, because that will add to your tool chest. It will let you know what to do properly if there's a conflict. It will let you know what can you do and what's legal or not legal, because that's going to be very important. So you're adding to your tool chest, and you want to your toolbox, and you want to know what that is. So that housing counseling is a little different. It doesn't deal with primarily your responsibilities per se, but how do you protect yourself? You have a home, you have a residence. Well, that apartment building or the tenant that you have does represent a certain portion of your income, and you want to know, are you working something or have something set up that if that tenant cannot pay the rent, what will you do? So you want to not lose your home because of a rental situation. So we make sure that your budgeting, it is important to, they're not separate, they're connected to you. You need to use that income for something that you're committed to personally as a landlord. So both of those two things go hand in hand. They are not separate entities. If you are a landlord, that is something that you want to look at, is your personal budgeting. And do you have something built into your personal budgeting or some other resource that will allow you to keep yourself afloat if you have to repaint or repair an apartment once it becomes vacant because they had to move out overnight and didn't tell you, but they tore the place up. So you want to know that you're prepared for it. And a property management team will help you be prepared. But if you don't have one of those yet, then you want to at least get in that landlord education class.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, definitely. So next, we're gonna dive into more questions, more specifically for Mary, but you guys can also feel free to chime in regarding HUD certified housing agencies. Why is it beneficial for a property owner to partner with HUD certified housing agencies?
That question is extremely, it's very dear to my heart because it's been happening for so long that renters don't know the help that is out there for them. If a landlord has a good tenant, you want to keep that tenant. You don't want that tenant to lose the tenancy simply because of something they weren't aware of. If they have an opportunity to understand, based on my current income, I might have to downsize for a season until I build my income back up. Well, housing counseling is there to guide them through that process. Then they can come back to the landlord educated on what their true options are. People think their options are, landlord, you just let me do what I want to do and let me do it when I want to do it. And they think those are their options, but they're not at all their options. But that's what happens. So they need to know what their true options are as a tenant, and it will benefit the landlord because they will have less turnover in their unit, in their properties. They will have less conflict because they have something else that they have provided to the tenant in order to make sure that the tenant gets what they need at a time that they need it. Because getting that help 6 months into the problem is the problem.
Definitely. So then,
I can chime in. I tell you, I can talk, so you all better jump on in there because I'm just gonna stop.
so then basically, it's important for tenants to be connected through the certified housing agencies as well, right?
Yeah, the tenant and the landlord. There is a confidentiality aspect to it. The tenant doesn't have to go to the same landlord that same agency that the landlord goes to, but there is a confidentiality that HUD insists on, a privacy act that we uphold, that even if we are talking to both, we have been trained and know how to handle it so that none of the information from the landlord gets to the tenant and none of the information from the tenant gets to the landlord. All they do is go back with their budget and talk with their landlord and try to work out a resolution based on the facts. So the tenant will see in black and white what their current situation really is. They may have a family member that's ill that they're taking care of, and they need to make some major decisions. Housing counseling allows that tenant to have some other options and understand, bounce this off. Will this work? Or what do you think about this? So that they can come up with the final resolution path that will definitely benefit them, and therefore you, the landlord, will not lose them as a tenant. Restructure their lives in such a way that it will make sure that they're able to retain their housing, because that's the bottom line. No one wants to move out of their housing before they're ready to move. So with that, if the landlord is being counseled and the tenant is being counseled, now we have a cohesive type of relationship that benefits both sides. That landlord now does not have to worry about working with a tenant that's ill-informed or not understanding what their current situation truly is. And that's their responsibility to do what they have to do if they desire to stay in the unit.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm famous. I am famous. I'd like to think I'm sort of a known entity when I reach out to counselors because I really want to get them involved. It's like, look, maybe I'm not being clear. Maybe they don't understand, but there's a reason why you have a counselor, so I can use them as a resource, to help you understand, things that are going on and maybe explain our side a little bit more. But I've never been afraid to reach out to a counselor to say, look, I really need for him or her to understand what's going on. And sometimes they make it, more clear than, what I'm saying to her. But like I said, I would say a good 90% of our tenants get it. get it. There's only one particular tenant that is just giving us, and everyone has one,
Or
that
two,
one
or three.
just, yeah, in our case, one, and it's tough. It's just so hard. It's so aggravating. And it's just, it just puts more stress on us. And it's just like, look, sometimes I have to call uncle, as a property owner, I have teenagers too. You get to a point where it's just like, look, maybe you just weren't ready for this. And that's okay. And that's okay to acknowledge that. Let's just, let's call it a day. We are only going to stay together for a year and that's it. Because really, at the end of the day, if this causes me more stress, then it's really just not worth doing. You know what I mean? And it's okay to say it's not okay. After a year, hey, it's been, not so great. And really, that's not what we're all about. Um, we need to have you on board supporting landlord tenant relations. But if you don't want to be supportive, you don't want to do the things that we ask, um, there's really nowhere else for us to go but just part our ways. And I can have another family, enjoying the
Right.
same thing that our other families, that 90% of our families enjoy in mobility neighborhoods. Like I said, I believe in the mission. I truly, I absolutely support, placing families in mobility areas because it's just such a win-win, but you just get the one that just really stresses you out. So, and I'm thinking, that's okay. Things didn't work out. I'm going to walk away and it's going to be fine. And hopefully they'll get it. And, it was an opportunity that, they weren't ready for at this moment in time, so that's
And
it.
sometimes they, in doing that, it takes a village. So that's a third party. It's another part to this whole scenario because there's different parts. So if the village of that's involved in their tenancy come together and they're all saying the same thing, but it's another part. And so we, as housing advisors, I don't even like to say counselors anymore because that has a negative connotation to it. I like housing advisors because we're advising them. Ultimately, they're going to make the final decision based on the facts that we open up to them. They're going to see the facts and they're going to have to make decisions at that point. And it is up to us to work together as a village, a corporate village, in getting all the resources that they need. And whatever resources are out there, we want to connect those tenants to it so that they can have all the help they need in order to resolve whatever conflicts that they are faced with.
Absolutely.
I would also add that, the Center for Conflict Resolution, we provide free mediation services. And I mentioned some of the housing work that we do, but we also take non-court related matters. And frankly, that's the time that can prevent you from ending up in a court related matter, is to have those conversations early on. So we provide a neutral, trained mediator who's not there to take anyone's sides, and we don't give advice. We're the opposite of the other services. We don't give any advice. We just help people think about their situation critically. We help open communication. We help people identify what's most important to them, and even think about what is the real issue that is at play, because so many times we use other things that have happened as a proxy for the real problem. That I'm going to say, like, you didn't fix my refrigerator when I wanted, because really I feel like you're being disrespectful, or that people want to, make it hard for someone because they have made it hard for them in a different way. And so we help people have those conversations. And I'll be honest with you, we get a lot of calls from tenants. We don't get nearly enough calls from landlords. And I think that this is a real resource for landlords. When you have a tenant who is not understanding, when you have a tenant who is not being a part of your community, for those of you who have multiple units, so you know about the neighbor disputes that you get called about, the noise complaints, like, this is a real resource for you to help manage conflict early on, even for those setting expectations conversations. To have that third party can be really helpful, because we understand conflict and we are able to help de-escalate and think about, why people are feeling emotional about things, and really help have those conversations before it escalates to the point where someone is filing a lawsuit, and costs, because, you know, even when you win in court, it takes a lot of time, resources, and is not practical in the remedies sometimes that it gives. And I think it's easy to make assumptions that a tenant is behaving in a certain way because they don't have resources or because they don't understand. And a lot of times that's not necessarily the case. They have the faculties, they have the resources, they have, you know, the situations. I mean, we even see evictions cases sometimes. You know, we see a lot of evictions cases where it's not a resource issue. It's an interpersonal conflict that has escalated to the point where people want to end the relationship in this manner, which makes total sense, but probably didn't need to get to that point. And so I, you know, invite you all to utilize our services if they're necessary, and don't forget about the opportunity to have those tough conversations in an environment that may feel safer because there's someone else there that knows what, you know, knows about conflict.
And thank you all. I just have one last question for Mary, and maybe if you could speak a little bit more. You did highlight a little bit. What exactly are the landlord and tenant housing counseling services?
With the landlord, the counseling services for landlords is focusing on what their 10-year desires are. We start there, both with the tenant and the landlord. What are your 10 years desires? So we have to start there simply because anything you do before that has to support that 10-year desire. So we want to know, what is it that they want? Also, we work very much on the financial budgeting. I like to call it the financial blueprint that supports that 10-year desire. So there's a financial blueprint that we help them create, and it's called a budget, but I call it a financial blueprint because it's fun, right? So we want that financial blueprint for them to use as an additional tool to make their financial decisions, because that again is part of the basis of whether we succeed, when we want to succeed, is following a financial blueprint. So if we have that financial blueprint, we then have a plan, and we got a strategy that supports that plan. So the landlord receives that. They receive any credit, anything that is needed that will help them be a successful landlord that they want to be. So that's credit, the financial blueprint, conflict resolution. We do a lot of what can you do to prepare going forward, because all the things that have already happened, let's just see what can be done, because you got to cut off the bleeding. You have to make sure that you're not doing the same thing that caused the prior problems. So we focus on what is it that needs to be done now going forward first. Let's stop the bleeding. So those types of services, and also if they want to purchase additional properties, we have what's counseling that's called so that's the investment part of our housing advising. So if they want to get another property, which we really love the fact that we hopefully are going to be back on that course again, where someone actually lives in a home and want to buy another investment property. We used to do that, remember? So we want that to come back, so that anyone that has a home that wants to start investing, we do that up housing advising, so they'll understand first what is your current situation before you even go into a second unit, a second property. So with housing, with the tenants, also what we focus on with that is, what is it that you want to accomplish in the next 10 years? And then we work our way backwards. Again, that financial blueprint is very important. We start with that. And their family is a part of their lives, and it can interject into yours unexpectedly. Death, and also if other things go wrong where they just get sick, you have to make some decisions. And there have been decisions that caused the parent to lose the home and the daughter to lose the home. So they're both without homes because of the decision. So we've helped make sure that they find and they understand how important it is for them to have a strategic plan for keeping their housing. And of course, the credit and credit building, how important that is to build on their credit. You were building on your credit when you purchased a home. It should never stop. After you purchase that home, your goal should be to continue to build on that credit. And because it is extremely important that you have a path to 800 credit score. You want to get as close to it as possible, and we help you make sure that you understand what are the principles and the tactics and all of the paths that you need to be on in order to get there. So there's also we also counsel the children, anyone 15 years old and up. They can sit in on the 8-hour home buyer education class with the parents. We ask them to do that. But with anything about housing, it doesn't matter whether it's a home or an apartment. The same principles apply. You have to save. You have to be accountable for who you pay every month. It is not a budget to write down what you pay, who you're going to pay on in October, come October 1, who you're going to pay. That's not budgeting. That's just divvying out your paycheck. Budgeting comes prior to that month starting. So you have to start that the month before, just like you get those bills the month before. So you want to start making sure you're ready for that next month and you have a financial plan in order to meet your expectations, but also what you're being held accountable for.
Thank you. Anna, you had said that you would receive some of these services. Maybe you could speak from the perspective of somebody who, as a property owner, who's
from like,
benefited from them.
you mean, or?
I'm sorry, say that again.
No, you said it received services like from CHA, you mean?
No, that I believe you said that you had reached out and worked with certified housing agencies.
I haven't worked with any housing agencies. I've just worked with the counselors at CHA that are like in the mobility program. So I have no, I have no qualms about reaching out to them because really they're there as a safety net. They're there as support for myself, so I have a chance to explain sort of my side of it to help them, explain to the tenants. So, in a normal sort of landlord property, tenant relations, you don't have the counselor as a third party. So like, I know who those counselors are. I know who's attached to what. So I do regularly reach out to the counselors. When they see an email from me or a text or calling them personally, we're at a point. So I use them very much as a resource for me to, get my point across and all that. So, and they're there, to be helpful for the tenant.
Cool. Thank you, guys.
And then last thing I want to say, the services for tenants is a free service, but it's an ongoing thing that has sometimes nothing to do right now with their current tenancy. It has to do with being prepared going forward. So our counseling is just a little bit different. And that's why it's so important for the tenant to connect with housing counseling as well as the landlord. Because if you have your situation 10 years from now, I'd like to give this quick example. My mom said, when I get 89 years old, I want to be as close to my grandchildren as possible. You better be prepared for it. So what are you doing to prepare for that? They've already told you, or you already know, but have you planned your housing decisions to flow with that? Because it's not going to change. Mom's coming. So you have to make sure that you have a strategic plan to continue your housing so that you're able to continue your immediate family goals and achieve those, as well as the family that you're going to support through those 10 years. So it's great that they have the tenant landlord conflict and property management counseling, but that's regarding just that period in their lives. Housing counseling that we provide, and we've been trained by HUD to do this, and we focus mostly on the sustainability. And that is, if you don't look at 10 years out, you're not looking at sustainability of housing for your family. So we want to work with everybody because we need to have that special conflict relationship or conflict resources so that we want them to hear it from the village. We want them to hear, look, if you don't, because sometimes they won't receive it from us either. It happens. But if they hear, okay, you know what, you could just take step 2. Let me get you to conflict resolution. And they will hear what they need to hear. Because so sometimes it takes a different perspective. We might need to bring in a psychiatrist level counselor and refer them to that. So it's really, it's going back to the fact that in order for everything to work the way it should, we should have individual and community village, and we need to have a corporate services village as well.
Excuse me. Thank you all very much. We're going to conclude the discussion for now for the Find and Retain the Right Fit Renter Center session, and just open up to Q&A. So again, if you have any account-specific questions, please send us an email and give us a call, and CHA staff will connect with you and provide resolution for your situation or question and address any questions. If you have questions for the panelists specific to this session, please type them in the box and on your screen, and we'll get those in a moment. So one question from Erica is, can we require the prospective tenant to go through housing counseling prior to accepting them as a tenant?
We refer everything to an attorney, and we want landlords to get used to doing that. If you don't have an attorney, you should have one. You don't want to wait until a problem occurs and then try to find an attorney. So with your leases, there are a lot of rental attorneys out there, landlord attorneys. There's a lot of attorneys that are specific to helping landlords. And you want to make sure the correct language is in that lease pertaining to housing counseling. If they put the language in there, then that's what you want to use. I'm not an attorney. If I say I don't want cats in my house, in my property, or dogs in my property, you put that in the lease, right? If there's our relatives that come over and stay for a while, what is the guidelines to that? It has to be spelled out in the lease. The lease is will protect you only as good as concise as you are with preparing it with the advice of an attorney. That's my answer to that, because I'm not an attorney.
Thank you, Mary. And honestly, that's something that's a CHA response as well. The best thing you can do is speak to an attorney regarding those types of questions. Is there another? No.
Adrian.
So how do you register for the landlord education classes?
There are a couple of them out there. One is CIS, but if you, what did they say? You Google landlord education classes, you want to make sure that the class that you attend is connected with HUD in some way, form, or fashion, or at least have some sort of longevity, because there's a lot of people out here that can give you education on becoming a landlord. But CIC is the only one that I know offhand. I believe they have a 4-week as well as a 6-week. I'm sorry, I didn't bring that to this session with me, and I apologize. I thought I had it. And but that information, you would just go online and put in landlord education, and you'll get that CIC. That's the best one. Well, that's the only one I know.
So one thing I'll add as well is that CHA has, CHA specific workshops as well that we do now currently online throughout the year. So you can always go onto our website and take a look at that as well, or reach out to someone from Owner Services and they can give you a schedule.
Excellent.
What is the best way to approach a tenant who has fallen behind on rent? That's a good one.
Well, they get a 5-day notice, right? I would suggest giving them the opportunity to talk with a housing advisor at that time. When they get that 5-day notice, that's telling them, that's letting them know you're keeping track. You're late. And do you desire to retain the unit? If you do, then this is what is owed as far as my records. And this is some resources that I would suggest that you contact. So that will put them on a path to resolving their whatever their issue is. And the counselor will be able to walk them through all of the possible options. If they fall behind, there's a 5-day notice. Just include a letter stating that there is housing advising available and it's free and it won't hurt. That would be what I would say.
I would agree with that. Absolutely. All of the notices that you are required to give them in the proper way that you are supposed to give that notice. It's not just a text message.
Right.
So make sure that you are keeping the records and following the letter of the law. But in addition to that, I would say check in. Hey, I noticed we didn't get rent this month. What's going on? How are you doing? What's happening. I'll never forget, I had an evictions case where a tenant had been 3 months behind on rent and wasn't answering phone calls. And the tenant had been a tenant in this unit for over 10 years. And they had a great relationship with their landlord. It was just like a totally different, like the landlord was like, this is like so out of character, but I kept going to the unit. The tenant wasn't answering. I kept calling. They weren't answering me. They were avoiding me. And in the eviction mediation that we were doing, the tenant had been in a coma and like was an elderly tenant who had been in a coma and had medical documentation. Like they were literally in a coma, and that's why they hadn't been paying rent, and that's why they hadn't been communicating. And they worked it out. And not to say that everyone is having a medical emergency, but the thing is that did they forget to pay? Did they, did something happen with their job? Is there some way, is there some resource? Are there resources out there like rental assistance or housing counseling that might be helpful to them that they want to look into? Do they have other ways? You can have, just be curious, explore the situation, treat it as so many times we treat these types of conflict as like win-lose. Give me the rent or, don't, like who's right and who's wrong. Treat it like a problem to solve together. Like, hey, we've got this problem. I'm supposed to get rent. You can't pay it. Like, how can we get out of this together? And mediation is a good opportunity for that too, is that if you are going to talk about ways to modify your payment plan or think about ongoing, most tenants are not going to be able to pay 2 months rent all at once. Or 3 months rent all at once. So you may be thinking about a payment plan or some kind of, arrangement like that. That's a great use of mediation. You can call the Center for Conflict Resolution. I noticed, some question about, can you force them to do it? No, it's voluntary to be a part of mediation, but we will approach them. If you say like, hey, you know what? I think we should have a conversation about this with the mediator and see if we can find a way to get through this and work it out together. And then we'll follow up and schedule with them and talk to them and let them know what the service even is. But we actually, even in evictions cases, have so many landlords and tenants who walk away continuing their relationship. And you would think it's gotten to the brink, they would end it. And we see people continue that relationship because they've had an ability to talk it out and come to a solution that they both are capable of doing and not just aspirational.
And with that, the last thing I want to say is that if they cannot be made to even have housing counselor. No one can force them. But with landlords, what is the benefit? Is that you've given them the resource. If they don't take advantage of the resource, that's not on you. That's on them, because the resources were there. You stepped out and you went beyond what you would normally do or anyone else would normally do. But you stepped out and said, look, I want to find some other ways to help you. And these are the things that you could do, but it's up to them to actually take advantage of it.
Thank you. Thank you all. Those are all really great points.
know if you can hear me, but we are having oh, there we go. We got Nick back up.
There he is. Welcome back.
It's good to be back.
All right. Hopefully
There we
you're able to
go.
hear him. Can everyone give a thumbs up if you can hear Nick?
You guys can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
All right. Looks like there's a little delay here, but we're getting the next question pulled up. Just give us one moment. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
So this next question comes from Diane. What do you do with complaints from the neighbors because your tenants are blasting music late at night? They've already asked the tenants on 2 different occasions to not blast their music. How would you guys recommend handling that situation?
For me, we get a lot of these calls, and I have to say that for me, this goes back to something that we talked about earlier in this session, is that it's about perception, it's not about the facts. And so, really, if it's louder than what the legal limit of noise is, then maybe you might be able to utilize law enforcement after you've had that initial conversation. But honestly, most of the time, these noise complaints aren't about somebody blasting their music above the legal limit. Many times it's about proximity or timing or things of that nature. And I would recommend mediation between the neighbors as well. The opportunity for the tenant and the other person to sit down, and we see it both ways. It's so easy to get that complaint and say, okay, I'll pass on the message. I'll check in with the tenant. And sometimes it's not the tenant. Sometimes it's just that somebody's bedroom is really close to where somebody plays their music, or it could be that this person goes to bed super early in the night, and or they have a kid, and the noise is a problem because of that, or something of that nature. There are totally situations where people, they avoid the conflict. They probably never had a conversation about what their expectations with each other are. So I would encourage them to talk about, mediation as an option for the neighbor and for the tenant. But beyond that, exploring with the tenant, what kinds of relationships do you want to have with your neighbors? Why do you play your music at this time? What is your situation? Is this that you work late and you're unwinding, and let's talk about that, right? So what is the heart of the issue? Because if we're just keep your music on or turn it off, it's going to be, again, an adversarial problem as opposed to a collaborative problem that they're trying to solve together.
And they may be ready to be a homeowner. So they can play their music as loud as they want. So maybe they need to start exploring that. And that's what we will definitely help them do, get on that path to home ownership. But in the meantime, they have to turn that music down. But at least they're on a path to something that they believe will make their life what they want to be, which is home ownership, so that they can play their music how they wish.
I tell tenants, sometimes they want to have a party, like a kids party or something. So I let the tenant know, look, just knock on the door, just say, look, we're having a party next door. I just want to let you know we're having it on Saturday, and please, we'll stop the music at 10. Kind of set those expectations. So you talk to your tenant saying, look, you have to respect your neighbors. Because they're either homeowners or renters themselves. They have to get to work. They have things going on too. But I think if you tell them ahead of time, hey, I'm having a party. Hey, I'm having this get together. But, we'll sort of to shut everything down by 10. Is that okay? Is that okay? And I firmly believe that if you're just open and honest with your neighbors about things that are going on in your backyard, they'll understand. They're like, okay, cool. They're having a party. It's fine, whatever. But I know it's going to be done at 10 because they came over to talk to me. So that's what I tell our tenants too, because, you're in single family homes surrounded by homeowners. And the deal is, this is the gig, that you have to respect the people around you, and this is what it's like. And if you want to become a homeowner and you want to live in a, on the block in a single family home, like this is the deal. This is the deal. It's different if you lived out on the farm and you had nobody to answer to, but you have people who live around you and surround you. So, you don't want any sort of missed expectations. If you set the tone to your neighbors and just say, look, this is what's going on, they'll get it, and they'll be like, okay, great. She always lets me know what's going on, and it's good. So it's not like it pops out of nowhere. So I really try to emphasize it to our tenants. It's just, just be nice to them and say, hi, hey, how you doing? How's the kids? It's all that sort of low level, like, respectability. And then, when things happen, it's like, hey, this would happen. And usually tenant, next door neighbors will be really nice and just say, oh yeah, yeah, she always comes to me. She's always talking to me, always ask me about my son or something like that. You encourage that type of communication, as we do too with our own tenants. How's your family? How's your mom? I heard she was sick. You feeling okay? And on all that sort of, it just sets that tone, and again, things like this are going to happen, but like on the worst side of things, you can explain to your tenant, look, your neighbors have every right to call the police. If it's 11:30, 12 o'clock, and you are blasting music and they have to get up and work or they need to go to church in the morning, they have every right to call the police on you. And that's a given. So, let's kind of avoid that, and avoiding that is talking with them, and doing that, because they have rights too. They can exercise their rights, as well. So, I just try to explain that we try to get to tenants to kind of get along with each other. I mean, the neighbors and tenants to get along, because really, at the end of the day, they are living on the block together.
Everyone wants quiet enjoyment, quiet being the operative word. Or they might even put on their dance shoes too,
Exactly. Oh my
since they can
God.
hear the music anyway.
Right, exactly. It's like, hey, do you want to come over to this party? You okay? And you kind of
Well, I
explain.
want to take a moment to thank the three of you, Mary, Perry, and Anna. You guys, I appreciate you guys being a part of the Owner Symposium this year, and thank you for everyone who was watching. If you can if you do have a chance to give us your feedback, let us know how we did on this workshop and session, and click right now on the button below of the video stream to share your feedback to us. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Bye, Anna. Bye, Terry.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.